All right, guys, we have to talk. There is currently an epidemic sweeping the fantasy football landscape, and it is the stat wizards and deep data dives that are absolutely obscuring what we actually know about our beloved game of fantasy football. I cannot open Twitter or X without seeing one of those tweets that's 18 stats that your league mates don't know, or these 10 stats are going to help you win your fantasy football draft. It's just too much. Today, we're going to dissect what actually matters and things that are really contributing to a lot of fantasy football players overthinking a ton of our prospects for this year. Going to be a fun one. So as always, like the video, comment down below what stats you think are wildly overvalued and are just absolute malarkey. Subscribe to the channel if you are new here, and let's go ahead and cue that intro. All right, guys, welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football. And like I said in the intro, we got to talk. The stat epidemic in fantasy football is completely out of hand. Things like unrealized air yards, yards per route run, targets per route run. These things, let's just break it down. Unrealized air yards, uncatchable air yards. Do those count as fantasy points? Last time I checked, you didn't get any fantasy points for these unrealized air yards or for the number of routes you ran. It simply doesn't matter. Maybe on a very minuscule level, or if you're in these really, really expert leagues, maybe they help make a small bit of difference, but as a whole, it's not something we should be putting a ton of stock into. Listen, I love Moneyball, that movie about baseball and stats with Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill. It's one of my favorite movies, one of the most quotable movies of all time. Listen, how can you not be romantic about baseball? But listen, when it comes to fantasy football, you're not a general manager. I mean, listen, we all love to pretend that we are, but you're not a real life general manager. Let's embrace the method of KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. And we're going to talk about 10 players today that people are just wildly overthinking and completely making projections based off these inane stats that, most of the time in your home league just don't matter. So without further ado, you can tell I'm exasperated because I'm so tired of hearing these inane arguments of these stats that really don't translate. Maybe they translate like a tenth or just like a modicum of translation to fantasy football, but overall it's going to just lead you down the wrong path and drafting the wrong players. So without further ado, let's talk about some guys that are wildly undervalued or wildly overvalued because people just don't want to embrace what is sitting right in front of their faces. So the first guy that I really, really have to talk about, and honestly, it's going to make it a lot easier based off of what happened last night. Yes, I'm recording this the day of I release. So yes, I understand the Terry McLaurin injury is driving this guy's value through the roof. He was a guy that, I've been talking about and championing all off season, a guy that was a buy low target for me, a guy that was an absolute steal of his current ADP. I ranked him in my top 20 wide receivers for the 2023 redraft season, and definitely a top 15 guy in a dynasty league when it comes to the wide receiver position. And, his current ADP was somewhere around the 7th round, and I was gobbling him up even in the 6th round. That's how much faith I have in Jahan Dotson. And with the Terry McLaurin turf toe injury, we can anticipate he'll be out for, at least the start of the season. And that's only going to propel his draft capital up. So maybe people are going to wise up to Jahan Dotson being good. But let's talk about the other reasons why Jahan Dotson is just such a good player for fantasy football. I'm a massive NFL fan. Like, I love the NFL. I follow this game religiously. I follow a lot of teams. Even though I'm not a Commanders fan, I still couldn't tell you who the offensive coordinator was last year, but I can tell you who it is this year. It's Eric Bieniemy, the guy who has led the highest passing yardage offense for the past 3 years from Kansas City, coming over and now working with the Commanders and their plethora of weapons in Terry McLaurin, in Jahan Dotson, in Antonio Gibson. We saw some really creative utilization of Antonio Gibson, who was a wide receiver at Memphis in college. So listen, I think it's going to be a massive bump to Jahan Dotson. And speaking of bump, why are so many second-year wide receivers being talked about or being drafted as if they've already taken that second-year jump? Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson are two prime examples that are being drafted in the third and second round respectively, and they're being drafted with that second round bump in mind. Jahan Dotson's second year wide receiver bump is not being factored into his draft capital, making him an ultimate steal. And listen, I understand that it's not a great quarterback situation. Sam Howell is not a top 15 quarterback in the NFL, but let's talk about this. Who was his quarterback last year? Taylor Heineke? Carson Wentz? None of those players are starting, and one of them's not even in the NFL anymore. So you can't tell me that his quarterback situation can get much worse than last year. Now, if Jahan Dotson was still as productive as he was last year with that option at quarterback, I guarantee you he can be as productive with Sam Howell on the field. And guess what? If you do want to talk about stats, you know who had more targets than Terry McLaurin down the stretch with Sam Howell as a starting quarterback? That's right, Jahan Dotson. This dude is a must draft. Keep it simple, stupid. Look at what's going on. Embrace the offensive revolution that's coming to Washington in the form of Eric Bieniemy, and get on board with the new wide receiver one in Washington and Jahan Dotson. Moving on to our second guy, that's just absolutely, I cannot fathom while he's being taken 7th round, 8th round in fantasy drafts. It's David Montgomery, the new running back 2. He's not really a running back 2. He's basically a running back 1B behind Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit. Guess what? You know who was running back 8 last year? The running back 1B for Detroit, Jamal Williams. And what actually has changed in Detroit? Still the same offensive coordinator in Ben Johnson. Still the same quarterback. It's actually a worse division all around them, especially when it comes to defenses with, Green Bay maybe adding some talent in the draft, but overall those are rookies that won't see much impact on the field. One of the better defenses in that division was going to be Minnesota Vikings, but they shipped off to Darius Smith to the Browns. So, overall, the defenses are worse. So, and we look at David Montgomery, who is no slouch himself. Jamal Williams has always been a backup running back, but if you're taking a guy who has been a true workhorse running back for the past 4 years with Chicago and putting him in this running back 1B role, he can handle that workload. He's going to be a guy that is going to be utilized heavily on offense. He's had the TD upside, because guess who had the TD upside last year? The guy that Ben Johnson and the Detroit Lions forced to run in between the tackles. That was Jamal Williams. And he tied Barry Sanders' franchise record with 17 touchdowns. And David Montgomery is going to get that role. Again, we mentioned that this is not a, there's really nothing different in this offense. Ben Johnson's still there. And last year, with Ben Johnson, with Jared Goff helming the quarterback, this was a top 5 offense in both points and offensive efficiency, and having David Montgomery be the beneficiary of that, especially with Jameson Williams out for the first 6 weeks, he's going to be a true stud, especially at his current ADP in the 7th or 8th round. And again, we talked about the touchdown upside. I am so confident in David Montgomery taking over that Jamal Williams role because of the size of Jahmyr Gibbs, how Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson have talked about utilizing Jahmyr Gibbs in his current in their offensive scheme as a versatile weapon, not so much a true between the downs running back. Even at Alabama, he was more of a scat back, pass to the outside lineup in the slot. Those guys, when you get inside the 5-yard line, when you want a guy that gets you 4 or 5 yards, it's going to be David Montgomery. He's going to be the goal line back. Don't overthink this. You want an RB8 from last season? That's the role David Montgomery's taking over. Moving on to another guy that has just been the epitome of consistency and production. It's Stefan Diggs, the wide receiver 1 for the Buffalo Bills. Let's go over his fantasy finishes in the past 3 years. Wide receiver 3, wide receiver 7, wide receiver 4. This is a guy who consistently goes out and produces year after year, is a top end wide receiver 1 for the Buffalo Bills, and is their primary weapon in that offense. Has an amazing connection with Josh Allen. So what's truly going to change? Well, nothing, except for the fact that he continues to be just completely shaded on in drafts and being taken. I've seen a lot of people take a lot of projected players ahead of him. We're talking about Bijan Robinson, a guy who's never played in the NFL before. And I get it, he's a good running back going to a good running team. But we have no idea what Bijan Robinson is going to look like in the NFL. We've never physically seen it. But we have seen Stefan Diggs be a wide receiver 1 3 straight years. He is still a top wide receiver despite being 29 years old. He's still in the prime of what that wide receiver is, and there's really no threats added to Stefan Diggs. I don't see really any of his targets, any of his snap share, any of these really crazy stats that people want to talk about and deep dive into stats. Nothing of that is going to change. He's still going to have over 150 targets. He's still probably going to end up with over 120 catches. He's going to end up with over 1,400 yards this season and have that massive touchdown upside. We've seen Gabe Davis is their wide receiver 2 option on that team, and he really didn't explode as a high-end wide receiver 2 option last year as many people projected him to. And Dalton Kincaid, while he's a great pass-catching tight end, we know historically for fantasy football, tight ends typically don't produce as rookies. So please tell me, am I missing something? Is there something that's really going to prevent Stefan Diggs from being a top 5 receiver for the third time in the past 4 years? Taking him at the end of the second round, having him fall even to the 201 in some drafts is absolutely ridiculous. Stop passing on proven production. Moving on to a guy that, we want to talk about these stats that don't mean anything. A guy that everyone's projecting for a breakout in Chigozie Okonkwo, he has the highest, I think it's yards per route run of a tight end position, and puts him up in that elite tier, that the yards per route run metric, that the similar yards per route run of Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. But guess what? However many yards you run, does that give you fantasy points? No, you physically have to catch the ball in order to get those fantasy points. So you could run down the field all you want. I mean, if that was the case, Gabe Davis would have been the wide receiver 1, just sprinting down the field every time he was lined up on the outside. But guess what? You actually have to catch the ball. You have to make meaningful yards. And he is tied to a Tennessee Titans team that was the worst passing offense in the entirety of the NFL. I don't care what these advanced metrics tell you. I'm not going to be spending a 10th, 11th round pick on a tight end that is not even the first option in one of the worst passing offenses in the NFL. Even with his quote-unquote stellar rookie season, he was a tight end 24 last season. 24. That's brutal. I mean, and typically when you're in a league that you're starting 12 tight ends, that's almost 11 options that are better than Chigozie Okonkwo. I would honestly rather pick someone off the waivers and start over him than have this guy being attached to, again, the worst, and I must repeat myself, the worst passing offense in the NFL last year. And, again, this is also going to translate a little bit to DeAndre Hopkins, a guy that's still being taken in the 4th round of many drafts. This is a guy that has serious injury concerns. He is on the wrong side of 30. Yes, when DeAndre Hopkins is on the field, he's an insanely talented wide receiver. But again, we know Tennessee Titans it's where veteran wide receivers go to die. Julio Jones, Robert Woods, and now DeAndre Hopkins. And again, I am really not willing to invest a 4th round draft capital. Again, all the stats, all the advanced metrics tell you that DeAndre Hopkins is a good wide receiver, but he is attached to such an abysmal passing offense that, frankly, in a conference that is as weak as the AFC South is going to run through Derrick Henry and the running game, it's just a wild overpay for both Chig and DeAndre Hopkins. Absolute passes. I don't care what the advanced metrics say. Moving on, that was a little negative. I get that. That was harsh. Let's turn it around. Let's be a little bit more positive. A guy that, I'm a huge fan of, just as an NFL player and also in fantasy, and it's going to be Nick Chubb. Why are we passing on this guy? Why is this guy falling to the end of the 2nd round in some drafts? Why is this guy not being taken at the end of the 1st round? Because all the, basic stats and all like the eye test tell you that this guy is going to absolutely explode for fantasy football. You want to know how I know that? Well, guess what? Through week 10 last season, he was a top 3 running back, and maybe his production fell off a little bit because he didn't get the touchdown upside through the last 6 games of the week when DeShaun Watson came back. But guess what? Still finished as the RB5. And the same thing we talked about with Diggs. Why are you going to draft a guy that's a projection when you have a true bell cow that's done it for 4 years in a row? Nick Chubb, let's look at his past 4 fantasy finishes. Running back 5, running back 7, running back 9, and running back 6. This is a guy that is going to be a stalwart of the running back position, and despite being 27 years old, is a guy that truly can handle the workforce. Really not much of an injury concern, knock on wood there, with Nick Chubb. And guess what? They got rid of Kareem Hunt. They've got rid of any sort of threat to him in the, taking away touches. And okay, I do not want to hear Jerome Ford. I don't want to hear what his metrics look like. I don't want to hear what it says in that preseason, because guess what? Over the course of the 2022 NFL season, he had 8 touches for 12 yards, which is 1.5 yards per carry. That is ludicrously bad, and he should not be on an NFL team if you're going off of that stat alone. He's not going to threaten Nick Chubb whatsoever. And truly, if you just want to look at the eye test, this is a guy that when you look at, I get it. Pass catching running backs are a cheat code for fantasy football. That's why the top 2 running backs are Austin Eckler and Christian McCaffrey. I get that. I'm not taking Nick Chubb over them. But if you want to talk about the best pure runner in the NFL, a guy that is truly elite at explosivity, elite rushing power, cutting ability, breaking through tackles, it is Nick Chubb. And he's going to be a huge focal point of that Browns offense. Stop overthinking it. Stop taking these guys that are in committees or are projections, coming in with people like thinking Ramondre Stevenson's going to break out, or, Tony Pollard's going to take that jump to a top 5 running back. These are guys that you're projecting. Why, take the risk of a projection when you can get one of these stalwarts at the running back position in Nick Chubb? Keeping on the same team here, this is going to be a real fun one, and it's going to be really quick. DeShaun Watson. Why? Why are we taking him in the 8th round? This is absolutely ludicrous. This is a guy that has not played football for nearly 2 years. And when he came back to the NFL for the last 6 games of the 2022 NFL season, he looked atrocious. He was horrific. He had one good game that maybe indicated he could knock the rust off. But overall, he looked horrible. He's age 27. I get that it's still young for a quarterback, but please give me an example of the last time anyone took more than a year off of football. And this is not, I don't want you to say, oh, well, this guy was injured for 2 years. Adrian Peterson out for a year with an ACL injury, or this guy, off the field with an Achilles injury. No. They were still with the team. They were still at team practices. Their life was still involved in football. DeShaun Watson was away from the team. He was not with an NFL team, not at the practice facility, not engaged in football activities, watching film, being with the team, learning the playbook for over a year and a half. And we look at guys like, the most immediate example that comes to my mind is Le'Veon Bell. And he came back, got a massive contract with the Jets, and was absolutely atrocious. So there is not an example in my mind that really proves to me that someone can take this much time removed from football activities and come back and be the same caliber of player that they were. And the fact that he's currently being drafted in the 8th round as the quarterback 9 on average is absolutely ludicrous to me. There are so many guys that finished as a top 10 quarterback last year that are going behind him. Geno Smith, Jared Goff, Tua. I understand that there's an injury history with Tua, but these are guys that have actually done it more recently to Deshaun Watson and are much cheaper. It is unfathomable to me why people are banking on the bounce back. And again, stop with these silly projections based on advanced metrics. Keep it simple. Go with the projection from last year. That's why I think Jared Goff is one of the best values at quarterback right now, because he's basically going undrafted or after the 13th round, and he finished as a top 10 quarterback last year. It's wild. So keeping it not on the same team, but within the same division, and a guy that, frankly, I wasn't going to talk about, but I saw in a mock draft on a very popular YouTube channel yesterday. He went at it was either the 212 or the 301. It was at that 2-3 turn. And why on earth are we drafting Joe Mixon that high? I cannot understand it. Let's follow the money, can we? Just for a second. This guy had cut rumors the entire offseason, up until very recently, until he took a massive pay cut just to stay with the team. Why do you think this is a running back that took that pay cut when running backs like Ezekiel Elliott and Dalvin Cook didn't take that pay cut? because I think he knows that he doesn't have it anymore, that he was not going to go to another team and get the kind of contract he was looking for. So he took basically a $1.5 million contract just to stay with the Bengals and be with them. Yeah, you can say, he has a good relationship with the team. He wants to be part of a Super Bowl contending team. I get all that, but we do have to follow the money. And this is a team that was very, very willing to cast him aside if he wasn't going to take this insane pay cut that they ended up giving him. And last year, with running backs, with quarterbacks, with a lot of NFL fantasy positions, these are teams that when you lose it, these are players that, because this is such a violent game, such a fast-paced game, you have so many stories from college players saying just things operate at a different speed. The NFL is a whole nother beast. So when you lose that first step, once you lose that quick burst, or whenever your talent or natural athleticism starts to reduce, it goes, and it goes hard and fast. And we saw that with Joe Mixon last year because he was wildly inefficient. Samaje Perine was a better running back for the Cincinnati Bengals than Joe Mixon was last year. And I get it, he finished high, but that's only because he had over 25% of his points in that one game where he scored 5 touchdowns against the Carolina Panthers. And let's look at this. Oh, yes, Carolina Panthers, one of the worst rushing defenses in the entirety of the NFL. It was clearly during the middle of the season. It was, right around the time that Jamar Chase got injured. They had to pivot. It was, again, an outlier of the entire season. If you remove that game from Joe Mixon's repertoire last season, he plummets outside of the running back 2 for fantasy football last year. Don't expect anything any different. We saw at the start of last season where Zach Taylor said, we want to get Joe Mixon more involved. We want to establish a more balanced running game, and it didn't work. They had a horrible 0-2 start to the season, and then Zach Taylor was like, oh, right, I have this guy named Joe Burrow on my team. Let me just put the ball in his hands and have him throw to my 2 top elite wide receivers in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And from that point forward, the Cincinnati Bengals were one of the highest, you can call this an advanced metric, highest pass. It was like a highest pass plays in a neutral game script. However, let's keep it simple. They just had the most pass plays in the NFL from that point on. It's a passing offense, and it's not going to be one that Joe Mixon is heavily involved in. Follow the money, follow the inefficiency, stop drafting him in the 3rd round. Moving on, we got to balance out my negativity with my positivity because I've been told that I can be kind of negative sometimes. So we have 2 more guys we got to talk about, both running 2 more guys coming up next, both running backs that I do want to be a little positive about. James Conner is going to be the next running back that I want to talk about, running back for the Arizona Cardinals. And this is a guy that personally I have ranked higher than Joe Mixon, even though he's being taken over 3 rounds later. And I just don't understand why his ADP is so low. It's absolutely egregious, this guy being taken in the 6th round, because he is a running back that can truly be, a running back to maybe borderline running back 1 as long as he stays on the field. Again, he does have a little bit of injury concern, but I'm not a guy that bets on the injuries. I'm going to keep an optimistic outlook, which might be hard for you to imagine after I was so pessimistic about Joe Mixon, but I am at heart an optimistic guy. But James Conner, he is a true workhorse when it comes to the field. Let's look at the sample size that's going to be most applicable to this season. It's going to be the last 6 games of the 2022 season when Kyler Murray was out with that torn ACL. And over that time stretch, James Conner was the running back 3, and he averaged nearly 30 opportunities per game. That is wild. There is not a single running back in the NFL, I think at this point, that's going to average nearly that many touches per game. Yes, is it ludicrous for me to anticipate James Conner getting 30 touches a game every single game for the entirety of 2023? No, but if he even gets remotely close to that, if he's averaging over 20 opportunities per game, that is enough volume to sustain James Conner, even if he is a little bit inefficient. He's going to be involved in the passing game and he's involved in the run game, because guess what? There's no offensive weapons on this Cardinals team. After James Conner, well, it was going to be Marlon Mack until he went down with the Achilles injury one day after signing. And they cut Eno Benjamin. So, who knows who it is going to be after them? Not anyone that, similar with Nick Chubb, not anyone that I have any real faith is going to take away opportunities from James Conner. And in the passing game, you got rid of DeAndre Hopkins. So Marquise Brown, obviously a very talented wide receiver, a guy that I really like in fantasy football this year, just from a pure talent perspective. However, you have Michael Wilson. who's a rookie. Rondale Moore, a little bit smaller guy who's going to operate out of the slot. But, it's not one of these egregious teams where you have to really divvy up the offensive pie. It's not like we're looking at a 49ers that have Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle. Listen, James Conner is going to get a insane amount of volume, and a guy that, this is why I'm so comfortable passing on a Joe Mixon, passing on a Breece Hall after the Dalvin Cook signing, passing on a Ramondre Stevenson after the Zeke signing, passing on Kenneth Walker, frankly, in favor of James Conner, because it is one of those workhorses you can score later on in the RB dead zone. Moving on to another guy that is just not getting any love. Not unfathomable why Naji Harris is falling to the third round, maybe even fourth round in some drafts, maybe some 10-teamers. This guy is one of the true remaining workhorse backs in the NFL. Obviously, Mike Tomlin is a guy that's always been very centered around a true 3-down back, wants a guy to get in and really be the one workhorse. He's not really running back by committee guy. So when you want, and that's valuable for fantasy, you want a guy that is going to be in there for at least 2 snaps per every 4 downs, is going to be the first down, second down guy, maybe even out there on the third down. He is also has good receiving work as well. And I don't want to hear about these advanced metrics of Jaylen Warren and his efficiency and his yards per target and his yards per contact. I do not care, because guess what? Najee is the guy. He is the workhorse running back. It's Mike Tomlin's offense. He really doesn't do running back by committee. And guess what? Why is no one talking about the fact that Najee was injured for most of last season? He was playing with a metal plate in his foot. No wonder he was inefficient on carries. I would not be efficient, and I would be, mentally wouldn't be able to cut. Would be harder for me to be more explosive if I'm pushing off of metal foot and I had a broken bone in my foot. However, after he took that metal plate out, after that foot was healed, week 10 onward, he was the running back 6. He wasn't just a running back 1. He was in the top half of running back 1s, being wildly efficient, even more so than Jaylen Warren over that time period. Don't let the whole season skew your impression of James Conner. Of Najee Harris. He is truly a great running back. If I see him at the end of the third round, at the top of the fourth round, it is an easy auto draft for me, especially if I go heavy on the wide receivers in the first and 2 rounds. And let's just look at the standpoint that this was a Steelers offense that had a rookie quarterback, and the offense was wildly inefficient because of that. It was a Steelers offense that was horrific when it came to offensive line talent, and, an offensive line that was actually protecting the quarterback and creating run lanes. We know from PFF, from these advanced metrics, that running backs in and of themselves don't truly guarantee rushing production. Quite a lot of that load falls onto the offensive line. And the whole mantra around the Pittsburgh Steelers this offseason was build the picket fence, build that offensive line around Kenny Pickett. And they went out and did that. They upgraded their guard spot by bringing in Isaac Seumalo from the Philadelphia Eagles. They drafted Roderick Jones with the 14th overall pick and traded up to go get him. This is going to be a much, much, much more improved offensive line for Najee Harris to run behind. And with him being fully healthy, he's going to smash for fantasy football. Letting him go past the third round is going to be a big mistake that you will end up regretting. Now, we talked about 2 guys that I love. We're coming up on guy number 10 and save the best for last. And I'm going to be a little bit pessimistic. But Jerry Jeudy. Hopefully my thing will load here. Come on, there we go. Jerry Jeudy. Why is the hype train rolling for the Broncos again? Why is Jerry Jeudy becoming a borderline 4th round pick? Why are we buying back into this? What is with these projections? We saw what these Broncos were last year. This is going into Jerry Jeudy's 4th year. That's kind of late in today's NFL for a breakout for a wide receiver in the NFL. It used to be a year 3 breakout. Now it's a year 2 breakout. And we honestly kind of expect rookies to come in and immediately produce. Otherwise, we basically throw them out and feed them to the dogs. Do we really think that Sean Payton is this magical cure-all for the Broncos? Was that the one missing piece? In my mind, in my eye test watching the Broncos last season, there was a lot more egregiously wrong with the Broncos than just just Nathaniel Hackett and the play calling and time management. There was a Russell Wilson problem. There was an offensive line problem. There was a communication problem. There was, just so many issues with this offense that I don't think bringing a new head coach is going to just be this magical cure all. And I mean, right now we're looking at a guy that just hasn't done it in the NFL. His highest finish was last season at wide receiver 22, and in standard is a little bit better, but no one really plays standard anymore. That's wide receiver 18. But look at how egregious these finishes are. It's just not an offense that I have any faith in, and I'm not really willing to take Jerry Jeudy and project him to be good in a fourth-year breakout, which is an outlier, by the way, and we know we don't bet on outliers on this channel, when there's so much proven production at his spot. I mean, even much lower in ADP, you have Mike Evans, a guy who has 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons, and frankly, at this point, is Baker Mayfield really that much worse of a quarterback than Russell Wilson? An argument can be made. So, Jerry Jeudy, again, I feel like is a massive landmine at his current ADP because it's just one of those things where it's like you're betting on projections, you're betting on these advanced metrics, you're betting on things that we haven't actually seen. Keep it simple. Stick to what we know. You saw it last year. Don't overblow it. Don't create this narrative that doesn't exist. We know what the Broncos are, and it's disappointing. So that's going to wrap it up for my Keep It Simple, Stupid episode. Just hopefully this kind of, these are 10 players that I am really vocal about that I don't really agree with either the projections, the advanced metrics, with all the stupid things that are being floating around social media. Just look at what we know. Look at the very basics. Go back to the basics and just keep it simple. That's all I'm begging you to do. Obviously, you can take this and apply it to a lot more players, but just it's a mindset that I don't think you need to advance every single decision with these wild stats, with these advanced metrics. And I know if you are like me, you are tired of seeing these 18 stats that are going to win you your fantasy football league, and you have never heard of the stat before in your life. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoy. Leave your comments down below what you think of these players. If I'm missing a stat or if I'm making it way too simple. I don't think I am, though. I'm going to come back on Thursday with a Superflex mock draft, and then we'll, into next week, we'll do one more mock draft, kind of do a preseason wrap-up, like a news and notes episode, and then we'll talk about what the content's going to look like during the actual regular season and when games start. I have some really cool ideas, so I think it's going to be a lot better than last year. So as always, I can't wait to see you guys then. Take care.